Hello everybody, this is Refresh and I am here to bring you a battle between the two Theros Beyond Death Planeswalker decks. We're going to be playing the best of three, and over here you have Elspeth and over there you have Ashiok. We'll get started by rolling 2 dice to see who goes first. Elspeth rolls 5. Ashiok rolls 10. Ashiok will opt to go first. We'll draw our opening hands. Ashiok draws an island, Glimpse of Freedom, Sleep of the Dead, Mindrack Harpy, Gravebreaker Lamia, Island, and Island. Because we don't have any black mana, and I don't know that Glimpse of Freedom is what we're looking to play right away, we are going to mulligan this and go down to 6. Ashiok's second hand has a Glimpse of Freedom, Swamp, Island, Swamp, Unknown Shores, Funeral Rites, and Swamp. This is also a really bad hand because we don't have any action at all, but I don't think we can afford to go down to 5, so we're gonna keep this hand and then take the Unknown Shores and stick it on the bottom. Elspeth draws. She gets a Daybreak Chimera, Plains, Leonin of the Lost Pride, Plains, Elspeth Devotee, and Sunlit Hoplite. I think this is an alright hand to keep, so we will do so. Ashiok starts by playing an island, and Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth draws, gets an Archon of the Falling Stars, will play a Plains, and then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok draws, gets a Swamp, will play the Swamp, and Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth draws, gets a Plains, will play the Plains, will spend 2 mana, and cast Leonin of the Lost Pride. This is a 3/1 cat warrior, and when it dies, exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. And Elspeth will pass the turn. At the end of Elspeth's turn, Ashiok will tap both of their mana, and they will cast Glimpse of Freedom. This is an instant. It says draw a card, and it has escape 2 blue, exile 5 of the cards from your graveyard. We'll put this in the graveyard and we'll draw a card. We get a Sleep of the Dead, and Elspeth's turn will end. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets a Funeral Rites. Ashiok will play a Swamp, then we'll tap all 3 mana here, and we will play Funeral Rites. This is a sorcery. It says you draw 2 cards, lose 2 life, and put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So we'll draw 2 cards. The first card is a Devourer of Memory. The second card is a Ashiok Sculptor of Fears. And then we're going to lose 2 life, taking us down to 18. And then we're going to put 2 cards in our graveyard. This is a Swamp and an Island. And then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Leonin of the Lost Pride. Elspeth will play a Plains. And then Elspeth will go to combat and attack with Leonin of the Lost Pride. Ashiok can do nothing about that. We'll take 3 and go to 15. Elspeth will spend 2 mana. We'll cast another Leonin of the Lost Pride. And then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets an island. We'll play the island. Ashiok will spend 1 black and 1 blue to play Devourer of Memory. This is a 2/1 Nightmare. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into your graveyard from your library, Devourer of Memory gets +1/+1 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. And for 1 blue and black, you can put the top card of your library into your graveyard. We'll also spend blue and play Sleep of the Dead. This is a sorcery. It says tap target creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. And it's escape 2 blue, exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. This will tap down the Leonin of the Lost Pride. Leonin of the Lost Pride is tapped. Then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Plains. We'll play the Plains. And then we will go to combat and attack with Leonin of the Lost Pride. Ashiok, feeling like they need to absorb some damage here, will trade the Devourer of Memory for Leonin of the Lost Pride. The Devourer will go into the graveyard. And Elspeth, when the Leonin will go into the graveyard, will exile Glimpse of Freedom from Ashiok's graveyard. Leonin dies. And then Elspeth will follow up by tapping everything and playing the Elspeth Devotee. This is a 3/3 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library and or graveyard for a card named Elspeth Undaunted Hero. Reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. We'll search for Elspeth. Here it is. We'll put Elspeth into our hand. We'll shuffle. And then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets a Sleep of the Dead. Ashiok will play a Swamp. Ashiok will spend 3 mana and cast another Funeral Rites, drawing 2 cards. We have a Mire's Grasp and a Glimpse of Freedom. We'll lose 2 life to go to 13, and we'll mill 2 cards. The first one is an island, and we have an Unknown Shores. We'll spend 2 more mana and cast a Mire's Grasp, targeting the Elspeth's Devotee. This is an enchantment aura. It says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets -3/-3. That'll be all of the Devotee's power, so both will go to the graveyard immediately. The Devotee dies. Then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Plains. We'll play the Plains. Elspeth will spend 2 mana to cast the Sunlit Hoplite. This is a 2/1 human soldier. As long as your turn, it has first strike, and then it gets +1/+0 as long as you control an Elspeth Planeswalker. And then we will spend 3 more mana and cast Daybreak Chimera. This is a 3/3 Chimera, and its spell costs X less to cast, where X is your devotion to white, which is why we were able to just spend 3 mana to cast this. And it has flying. Then we will attack with the Leonin of the Lost Pride for 3. Ashiok takes 3 and goes to 10. Then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets a Pharika's Spawn. Ashiok will play a Swamp. Ashiok will spend 4 mana to cast Pharika's Spawn. This is a 3/4 Gorgon with escape 5 black, exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. Pharika's Spawn escapes with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. When it enters the battlefield this way, each opponent sacrifices a non-Gorgon creature. For this purpose, it is just a 3/4. And then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Plains. We'll play the Plains. Elspeth will spend 5 mana and cast Elspeth Undaunted Hero. This is a legendary Elspeth Planeswalker with 5 loyalty, and for +2, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. For -2, search your library and or graveyard for a card named Sunlit Hoplite and put it into the battlefield. If you search your library this way, shuffle it, and for -8 until end of turn, creatures you control gain flying and have +X/+X, where X is your devotion to white. We'll go ahead and immediately +2 it to get up to 7 loyalty. And at 7 loyalty, we will put a +1/+1 counter on both Leonin of the Lost Pride and the Sunlit Hoplite, making this a 4/2 with first strike, and this a 4/2, as well as a Daybreak Chimera. We're going to attack with the entire team for lethal, forcing a block. Ashiok will trade the Pharika's Spawn with Leonin of the Lost Pride. We'll take 7 to go down to 3. And Pharika's Spawn will go to the graveyard. As Leonin of the Lost Pride dies, it will target Pharika's Spawn from the graveyard, exiling it. Leonin of the Lost Pride dies. Then Elspeth will pass the turn. At the end of the turn, Ashiok will tap 2 islands and cast Glimpse of Freedom again. We'll draw a card. This is a Devourer of Memory. And Elspeth's turn will end. Ashiok untaps, draws a Mindrack Harpy. Ashiok will spend 2 mana and play the Devourer of Memory. And then we'll spend 1 more mana and play Sleep of the Dead, targeting the Daybreak Chimera. And then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws a Plains. We'll play the Plains. Elspeth will -2 herself to go back to 5 to find a Sunlit Hoplite from her deck and put it onto the battlefield. We'll shuffle. Then Elspeth will attack with the Sunlit Hoplite. Ashiok will chomp with the Devourer of Memory. Then Elspeth will spend 6 mana and cast Archon of Falling Stars. This is a 4/4 Archon with flying. When it dies, you return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets a swamp. We'll play the swamp. Ashiok will spend 6 mana and cast Ashiok Sculptor of Fears. This is a 4 loyalty legendary Ashiok Planeswalker. For +2, you draw a card. Each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. For -5, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And -11, gain control of all creatures target opponent controls. We'll immediately +2 to go up to 6. And then we'll draw a card. This is a Swimmer in Nightmares. And then we will mill 2. We put in a swamp and a swamp. Elspeth will mill a Indomitable Will and a Eidolon of Inspiration. And then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Hero of the Winds. Elspeth will play a Plains. We'll +2 Elspeth in order to put a counter on the other Sunlit Hoplite as well as on the Daybreak Chimera. And then Elspeth will attack with everybody for lethal. Ashiok takes 16 damage and goes to -13 and perishes. We'll be right back for game 2. Ashiok opts to go first again. We'll draw 7. Ashiok draws a swamp, Glimpse of Freedom, Funeral Rites, Elite Instructor, Ashiok's Forerunner, and a swamp. Having no blue mana makes this pretty bad, and so we are going to mulligan this and go to 6. Ashiok's second hand has a Devourer of Memory, Timuret, Chosen from Death, Island, Mindrak Harpy, Glimpse of Freedom, and Gravebreaker Lamia. Having only 1 land means that this hand simply cannot work, and we will mulligan again to go to 5. Ashiok's third hand has a Mindrak Harpy, an island, Sleep of the Dead, Funeral Rites, Underworld Charger, and Swamp. I think we can keep this hand. We will take the Mindrak Harpy and the Underworld Charger and put them both on the bottom of the deck, putting the Mindrak Harpy first. Elspeth draws, gets a Plains, Hero of the Winds, Plains, Leonin of the Lost Pride, Elspeth Undaunted Hero, Leonin of the Lost Pride, and Plains. This seems like a fine hand, so we will go ahead and keep it. Ashiok will start with an island, and will pass the turn. Elspeth will draw Plains, and will play it, and then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok draws an Unknown Shores, will play the swamp, and then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth draws a Hero of the Winds, will play the Plains, will tap both Plains, and play Leonin of the Lost Pride, and then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok will draw, will get a swamp, will play the island, and then will spend 3 mana to cast Funeral Rites. We'll draw 2 cards. The first is Timuret, Chosen from Death. And then we'll also get a swamp. We will lose 2 life to go down to 18, and then we'll mill 2 cards. The first is a swamp, and the second is Ashiok Sculptor of Fears. And then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws an Elspeth's Devotee. We will play a Plains. We'll attack with Leonin of the Lost Pride for 3. Ashiok takes 3 and goes to 15. Then Elspeth will spend 2 more mana. We will cast Leonin of the Lost Pride, and then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, Draws, gets a Glimpse of Freedom. Ashiok will play the Swamp. Ashiok will tap 2 black to play Timuret, Chosen from Death. This is a 2-star legendary enchantment demigod, and its toughness is equal to our devotion to black. Right now that would be 2. And for 1 and a black, exile up to 2 target cards from graveyards. You gain 1 life for each creature card exiled this way. And then we will spend 1 mana to cast Sleep of the Dead, targeting the Leonin of the Lost Pride. This Leonin is tapped, and then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Plains, will play the Plains, and will attack with Leonin of the Lost Pride for 3. We'll trade Timuret with the Leonin of the Lost Pride. Timuret dies, and the Leonin will also die. As the Leonin dies, it will exile Ashiok, Sculptor of Fears, from Ashiok's graveyard. Leonin will die. And then Elspeth will tap 4 and play Hero of the Winds. This is a 1/4 human soldier with flying. Whenever you cast a spell that targets it, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. And then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets an Ashiok's Forerunner. We will play a Swamp, and then Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Plains, will play the Plains. Elspeth will tap out and cast Elspeth Undaunted Hero. Go ahead and immediately +2 her up to 7. Put +1/+1 counters on the Leonin and the Hero of the Winds. And then we'll attack with both of them for a total of 6 damage. Ashiok will spend 5 mana and cast Ashiok's Forerunner. This is a 3/3 human wizard with flash. When it enters the battlefield, we may search our library and our graveyard for a card named Ashiok, Sculptor of Fears, reveal it, put it into your hand. If you search your library this way, shuffle it. We already know it's exiled, so we'll just go ahead and play it, and we will trade with the Leonin of the Lost Pride. This will kill the Ashiok's Forerunner, and Leonin, as it dies, will exile the Sleep of the Dead from Ashiok's graveyard. Ashiok will take 2 damage from the Hero of the Winds to go to 13. Leonin of the Lost Pride is down, and then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets a Swamp. We'll play this Swamp. We're going to tap 2 mana and cast Glimpse of Freedom to draw a card. This is a Swamp. This is all we can do right now, so Ashiok will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Karametra's Blessing. We'll play a Plains, and then we will attack with Hero of the Winds for 2. Ashiok takes 2 and goes to 11. Elspeth will -2 herself to go back down to 5 to get a Sunlit Hoplite from her deck onto the battlefield. We'll shuffle. And then we'll spend 4 more mana to play another Hero of the Winds, and then Elspeth will pass the turn. Ashiok untaps, draws, gets an island, will play the island, and then Ashiok, with just lands, will pass the turn. Elspeth untaps, draws, gets a Plains, will play the Plains. Elspeth will +2 up to 7 again to put counters on the Sunlit Hoplite as well as the Hero of the Winds. And then we'll go to combat. We'll attack with the Sunlit Hoplite and both Heroes of the Winds for a total of 8 damage. Ashiok has no response, so Elspeth will tap a Plains and cast Karametra's Blessing, targeting the Hero of the Winds, giving it +2/+2, making it a 4/7, and then its trigger will go off, giving us a total of 3 more power. So that will do a total of 13 damage to Ashiok, to which Ashiok has no response because they only have lands, and Elspeth will win the day. This was a really unfortunate run for Ashiok because they had to mulligan multiple times on their turns and then ran into a flood situation in the second game. They also really never got off to any start while Elspeth was able to draw lands and gas in a relatively decent manner and then pop off with the Planeswalker. And so I don't know that this is going to be a representative game for Ashiok, but Elspeth does seem to have performed quite well here. Let me know what you thought of the games in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of my videos, you can hit subscribe. This was Refresh. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.